Good evening, everybody. Let's make a start. I now declare the agenda briefing open at just after 6 p.m. It's about 6:03 p.m. and today is Tuesday, the 10th of November 2020. I start, of course, by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and we also pay our respects to elders, both past and present, and acknowledge, of course, that this is NAIDOC Week. Tonight's meeting is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next ordinary council. Councillors, can I ask you to please just refrain from speaking? What?
Excuse me, I'll let my electronic.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, of course. Thank you. Tonight's meeting is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next ordinary council meeting. No decision making or entering into debate is to occur at this meeting. Can I ask everyone present to please turn off electronic devices, including mobile phones, iPads and tablets, for the duration of the briefing, only as they interfere with the recording. Tonight's agenda briefing is actually being recorded, and a copy of the audio recording shall be available on the city's website within 72 hours of the meeting. Agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information you provide will be publicly accessible. Just start with item 2, which is apologies. The Director, Canning Community and Commercial, is an apology for tonight. I also have an apology from Councillor Craig Sweeney for this evening, who is not able to be here. Approved leave of absence. I have Councillor Kunzer at item 2.2 has been granted leave of absence for the period 9 November to 23 November inclusive. Disclosures of interest. CEO at item 3.
Thank you, Mayor. I have received 2 disclosures of interest. One from Councillor Graham Barry in relation to item number SD 027-20, advertising of draft local planning policy LP16, public open space contributions in residential areas. It's a impartiality interest and it relates. The nature of the interest is impartiality, sorry. The extent of the interest is Councillor Barry is a owner of a part owner, is that Councillor Barry? Part owner of a property in the catchment area of the draft policy LP-16. The other declaration is from Councillor Bain in relation to item SD-035-30. The report title is Application for Development Approval, Addition of Place of Worship and Community Purpose Used to Existing Educational Establishment at 22 Dalton Place, Lot 902, Wilson. It's an partiality interest, and the nature of the interest is that an extended family member attends Rehoboth Christian College for educational purposes. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, CEO. At item 4, question time for the public. Let me see, questions from the public. I actually have a question I'm going to read out here, but first the preamble. The time set aside for public questions is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to items listed on the agenda papers this evening. For recording purposes, I'll ask those who wish to ask a question to step to the podium and state your name and address, and then proceed to ask your question. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with the city's policy AD.02, members of the public who have registered their interest to ask questions with the city's administration shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. Written questions will precede verbal questions. I just have a written question here, which I'm going to actually read out. It's from DJ and WM Graham of 35 Braybrise Road. It relates to item SD 027 of 20. The question is the 10% contribution from existing homeowners when they sell their property, or from the developers when they decide to subdivide? Question mark. We'll obviously take that on notice and we'll provide a response to DJ and WM Graham. I now move on to Director Bride. Are you able to answer that question?
Yes, through Mr. Mayor. It would actually be through the subdivision process, so it's not a case of selling the property. That contribution would only apply if the subdivision was in one of those 4 particular suburbs where there is a public open space shortage, and it would only be if that subdivision included between 3 and 5 lots, then that 10% contribution at the subdivision stage would be applicable.
Thank you. I'll call on Mr. Steve Walker. You've got a number of questions, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Hall. Steve Walker, 22 Farnham Street, Bentley. The first 2 questions regard the partial road closure of Hamilton Street. In regards to point 18A, question 1, did City of Canning receive a response to the local public notice on the 27th of August 2020?
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take that question on notice, Mr. Walker. I understand there's a bit of confusion in relation to point 18E. I'll confirm that in writing to you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Question 2, and when are you notifying the respondent?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll notify the respondent once I can confirm whether or not a submission was received. Thank you.
Okay, the next question relates to
your third and final question, Mr. Walker. Thank you.
True. The council meeting dates for 2021 to the City of Canning Executive. How many special council meetings do you predict for 2021? There have been oversupply of them in 2020, thus incurring additional cost to annual budget.
CEO, are you able to provide a response for Mr. Walker?
No, Mr. Walker, I'm unable to provide you with a guesstimate. Special council meetings are called for special reasons. We try and deal with as much of our council business during ordinary council meetings, which are publicly advertised ahead of time so we can get maximum involvement or attendance from the public. If we do have a need for a special council meeting for a special reason, of course that will be advertised and it'll be available for members of the public to attend if that meeting is dealing with a matter that is not of a confidential nature. So I can't give you an estimate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming along, Mr. Walker. Richard Aldridge, please.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Richard Aldridge, 5 Minota Avenue in Shelley. My first question is, how many not-for-profit clubs and groups are leasing City of Canning assets in the City of Canning?
We'll take that on notice,
Not a problem.
Mr. Aldridge. Your second question?
What's the total additional income expected to be generated from the City of Canning from changing all the not-for-profit groups from peppercorn leases to the rental rates as outlined in the schedule of fees and charges? I'm happy to have that on notice too, if you like.
I think we would have to, obviously, Mr. Aldridge. Thank you. And your final question?
Final question is, if our local council representative wished to amend CC 062-20 so that Rossmore Junior Football Club received a peppercorn lease instead of the officer's recommended $1,144 lease, would it be her right to do so?
But why do you say her?
Because Councillor Kunz is not here and my local representative is a girl or a woman.
Well, I'm not sure that, well, obviously any councillor is able to amend any motion that comes before council. You would know that. Is that your question?
That was
is she
the
able
question,
to
yes.
amend it?
Yes.
Any councillor has the authority or the power under the standing orders to amend a motion before council.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Aldridge?
Good evening, Mr Mayor, Councillors, CEO and City of Canning Directors and Officers. My name is Marnie Aldridge. I live at 5 Minota Avenue, Shelley. My first question is, the Office of the CEO has requested an increase of $76,280 to be given as an additional executive support for the Office of the Mayor. Given that the Mayor already has a full-time secretary, can you please explain why this expenditure is needed and why a new assistant's additional duties will be and that they weren't required in the budget earlier said?
I think you may have misconstrued what appears there, Mrs. Aldridge, but I'll get the CEO just to clarify that. I think you're on the wrong track there. But Mr. CEO.
Mrs. Aldridge, I'll try and answer your question. The PA to the Mayor was appointed very soon after the Mayor was elected as Mayor. Previously, there was a PA position provided to the previous Mayor. I had made a decision at that stage in conjunction with discussions with the then Mayor around whether the PA assistance could be provided through my exec officer, and he agreed to do that. With the new Mayor joining the organisation, Mayor Hall is significantly more active in the community and more active in relation to meeting with politicians and other major stakeholders, heads of departments in the case of attending with me. So the allocation of funds recognises that there is a cost for providing that service and of which we obtain significant benefit. Now, at some point in time, I mean, what was happening with that position is that was an agency was providing that service. I've subsequently converted that position to a full-time or a part-time employee in the City of Canning. So that's where the additional costs appear in a different section of our budget. Rather than a contract or contracted out service, it appears now as a salary component within the budget.
Okay, sorry, just to clarify, so the previous Mayor had an assistant or a secretary for 3 days, and now it's been increased to a full secretary and an additional person, or just the one secretary?
One PA and 4 days.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. My second question is, reviewing the list of the agenda and OCM dates of the 2021, I don't see an annual electors meeting. Can you please confirm what date the AEM meeting will be held now that Minister Templeman has confirmed that all restrictions have been removed from these meetings?
CEO.
Mrs. Aldridge, the special AGM or the annual general meeting of electors is determined by the date that we receive the auditor's report. So there's a certain number of days following the receipt of that audit report that we are required to have an AGM. So therefore, we actually can't put that in the ordinary council meeting dates or agenda briefing dates, because we will not know when that can be scheduled because we haven't received the audit report as yet. Sure,
but shouldn't that be done within a year from the last meeting?
No, it's not done within a year of from the last meeting. It's done from the date we receive the audit report, and that's done after the conclusion of the previous financial year. So the 1920 financial year concluded in June, end of June this year. So therefore, we then have our accounts audited. The auditor then provides a statement or a report. When we receive that report, we have, how many days is it, Mr. Leeson? 30 days from the receipt of that report to convene an annual general meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to double check because it is usually every year around at the same time in January, so I was hoping it would be this time again. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the floor before I close public question time? Thank you, folks. I'll close public question time now. The time is 6:17 p.m. Thank you. We'll move on to deputations now at item 4.3. A deputation has been approved for Graham Tuttleby regarding item 062 of 20, the new lease for Rossmoyne Junior Football Club. Mr. Tuttleby, would you like to step forward? You've got 10 minutes to make your deputation.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to the City of Canning and the councillors and officers for giving Rossmoyne Junior Football Club the opportunity to make this deputation. I am joined by Graham Tuttleby, who will speak following myself, and also Dale Clark, both committee members, and they work closely with the City of Canning officers day to day. So this presentation will be brief. It will be in 3 parts. Just a quick overview of the Junior Football Club, what we have achieved in our history, and obviously what we are seeking from the council today. So, actually need to go back too far forward. Okay, so I said brief outline, use of the facilities, and obviously the new lease we are seeking. So within the agenda briefing, very, very detailed history back to 2014 when we first engaged with the council to have a lease. We've occupied the premises there at Lot 501 Coolin Drive since 1972. So we have been quite eager to have security in place with a new lease. So as I said, 1972, so we'll be 50 in 2021. We have a management committee that has a set of rules, procedures and policies which conform to our club constitution. We currently have 13 committee members on our committee, president through to general committee members and volunteers, and each have clear responsibilities to manage the club. We oversee a number of junior teams in our catchment in Shelley, which is a small area, but teams from Auskick through to Year 12. We're very proud to say we have girls in that program, and we have an emphasis on placing more girls into AFL football for participation in years moving forward. We are a volunteer organisation committed to providing a safe and inclusive environment from which our members can grow as footballers and as individuals. We do have a purpose statement, and that is to ensure that we have a caring, safe, proactive environment for all our members. We are a gold accredited club under the AFL Quality Club, so it's important to recognise that there are only 25 clubs in Australia that have that gold level accreditation. There are 5 junior clubs in Western Australia that have that accreditation. We are one of those. Simply what it means is that our administration standards required are exceptional. We have, again, as I said, policies and procedures in place that are a very high standard from finance through to operations. We need to ensure we implement education and welfare programs for all of our members that ensure we engage with our local community. So just to highlight a couple of examples, we have some fantastic sponsors. This year we put on 4 workshops in a shortened season that's centred around mental health awareness for our players and our parents, as well as also strength and conditioning and fitness information that one of our sponsors provided. So very important to note that we are very, very proactive. A membership base, we note there on the presentation, approximately 175 families with around 220 currently registered players. It says there from Rossmore and Shelley. I will note we actually cover all 5 wards within the city of Canning. So we have children from as far away as Bentley, Leeming, Parkwood, Wilson, etc., many other suburbs, Bateman, even outside the city of Canning. So our club has a very good reputation, very, very broad coverage of members. 39 life members currently, most of them still very, very active within the football club. I'll add to that also by saying that we have had 43 WAFL footballers come through our club and 13 AFL footballers as well. So it has provided a very strong breeding ground for AFL footballers. So I'm going to ask Graham Tuttleby now to come up and just continue the rest of the deputation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. A bit of teamwork from the football club, as you would expect. So, Mr Mayor, office bearers and councillors, thanks very much for the opportunity for presenting tonight. It's poor form to start with an apology, but I must apologise. Our original deputation request was for a peppercorn lease. We've since taken advice and realised that that's not part of council policy anymore, so we have respected that. But what we are seeking, as you'll see as I go through my presentation, is a reclassification of the building which would give us a less rent per annum than what is currently proposed. So I'll reveal that as we go through. In terms of the building itself, what have we achieved? Well, as Matt said, we've been around since 1972. A team of members from the club and related sponsors built the club rooms entirely out of club funds and club labour. So I think that's an important point to make. So there was no burden financially on the council at that stage. The facility is around 200 square metres initially. It has been added to that, but 200 square metres located right adjacent to the current council change rooms and canteen area. So the architecture is quite consistent with that, and it's a good quality build and has stood the test of time. And I'm sure the members who constructed it, when talking to those life members, there were some pretty good times had. So it wasn't all hard work, but the facility is there and has stood the test of time. About 6 years ago, we did a major upgrade of the club rooms. As you can see from those photos, it's quite an impressive club room facility. What we did at that stage was we did drywalling of the walls. We painted them. We hung a memorabilia, it's a hard one to get around, with a professional artist, so that it's very well presented. And we put new carpet and so forth. Upgraded the kitchen and the bar area. So that was a big commitment, but it's part of the club's strategic plan that we actually allocate capital each year from our membership funds to try and make sure that we can upgrade the facility and keep it in A-grade condition. If you looked at that facility at the moment, probably the replacement cost would be around $500,000. As I said, about 6 years ago, we did the major upgrade to the club rooms. We also built in a purpose-built storage facility next door. So the existing club rooms are around 200 square metres. The purpose-built training storage facility for all our club kit, training gear, etc., is about 100 square metres. So it's about a 300 square metre facility all up. And as you can see there, it's all quite nicely fitted out and well presented. So it stores all our training equipment for our Auskick all the way through to our senior teams. In terms of how we manage the club rooms, it's a shared arrangement that we have with the amateur football club. We've been doing that for about 20 years. It is a shared cost model, but not purely in a commercial sense. It's really just sharing the burden of football expenses like line marking and equipment and things like that we do with the amateur club. And we do get a little bit of income back from them for the storage areas that they use and the hanging of their memorabilia, etc. But it's a fairly modest financial model. Generally, we make the club rooms available to other clubs. We understand it's part of the council's club tenancy agreements that it's open, facilities are open to all clubs, and we certainly practice what we preach there. The cricket club, the netball club and the Willetton basketball club, even with their renovations, have all used our facility at no charge for annual general meetings and committee meetings, etc. So we do share that facility. We've also done cross-membership promotions with other clubs, particularly like the tennis club and the cricket club, being summer sports and we're a winter sport, and that works very well. In terms of care of the club rooms, we really seek to maintain it in excellent condition, as you can see from the photos, and we have a policy not to seek any revenue from external parties. As you can imagine, being in a great area that we are, we do get requests for 21st, 18th birthdays, etc., people willing to pay for it. But certainly, I guess we're a bit jealous of the condition of the club rooms. We don't want to expose it to unnecessary risk via parties and have that sort of thing happen there. So we don't actually engage in any commercial activities in relation to the club rooms. Everything we do is for local clubs at no charge. And we also, part of our budget, as I said, we have provision for investing in capital to maintain the condition and presentation. Oops. One slide back. Okay, so I think we've got a couple of minutes left. So what are we actually seeking? So as I said earlier, we're seeking to alter the rent clause that's in the current key terms and conditions. So we're looking to replace that with the category below that. So we don't see it as giving good revenue potential because we don't actually engage commercially. We see it as having reasonable revenue potential. So what does that mean? That means, I guess, we're looking at a reduction in the rent from, I think it's $12.68 with GST per annum down to $8.58 per annum. We'd be using that savings to contribute to putting funds towards continually improving the facility. And why are we asking that? Well, we feel that certainly the club's put a lot of equity into the facility, so that's definitely a benefit to the council. We really not have a policy to generate revenue, so we think that reclassification is justified. We make the club rooms available to local clubs, so we're quite engaging in that respect. And both the club rooms and the storerooms are A-class condition, and we plan to keep them that way. So that's it in summary. We're just looking for a reclassification. Apologies once again for the initial reference to peppercorn. That was a mistake on my behalf. So really, in closing, we'd like you to certainly consider that as an amendment to the key terms and conditions. And we're certainly very, very grateful for the investment the council's put into the Shelley Reserve of late. The lights are fantastic, and the re-roofing that's happening at the moment is quite exciting, as will be the upgrade to the change rooms over time. So thank you for your time, and we hope to get a favourable decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next deputation will be from... We don't normally ask questions, no. The next deputation, what I'll do, Lindsay, though, I'll bring the matter forward so the gentleman here can hear us talking about it. I've got another deputation from Mr. Clayton Plugg, Senior Town Planner from Harley Dystra, and that's regarding ST 02520, the application for development approval, the addition of a place of worship and community purpose uses to existing educational establishment at 22 Dalton Place, lot 902 in Wilson. Mr. Plugg, would you like to come forward? You've got 10 minutes to make your deputation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. My name is Clayton Plugg, Senior Town Planner at Harley Dykstra, and I do thank you for the opportunity tonight to present this deputation to you in respect of the proposed place of worship and community purpose facilities, or uses I should say, at the existing Rehoboth Christian College campus in Wilson. I'm here tonight with Mr. Seth Merlo, who is a representative of the college, and with Pastor Ben Murphy, who's pastor at the Wilson Christian Church, the organisation that's currently seeking to use the school's facility. I'd like to very briefly just set out 3 points in this deputation. Firstly, our general agreement with the recommendation. Secondly, the need to strike the right balance between flexibility and control. And then finally, just some background information on how the original unapproved activity has actually occurred. So as just noted, my first point, we would just like to confirm that we generally agree with the recommendations set out by council staff. As the applicant, we have been working with the landowner and the city for some time now, seeking to come to a reasonable point of agreement that works for both parties, and we do feel that this recommendation generally strikes the right balance. Whilst we do have some very minor reservations in respect of a few of the conditions, the school is fully committed to ensuring that they act in good faith towards this approval. They really do see this as an opportunity to prove that these uses can occur in a way that has no real impact on the amenity of the local area. In particular, the school is committed to implementing the operational and noise management plans that are required by proposed conditions. And indeed, the school has commissioned Harley Dykstra to prepare a draft noise management plan to assist the city staff in their assessment of the proposal. We will continue to work with the city to ensure that these conditions and all others are implemented correctly. So this brings me to my second point, which is namely the need to strike the right balance between flexibility and control. And herein probably lies the biggest challenge with this application, and that's because from the applicant's perspective, there is a real need to remain flexible in order to ensure that they can accommodate potential users. But we also understand that from the city's perspective, they would like the amenity impact to be managed in an appropriate manner. So our client is generally satisfied with the 12-month approval idea and the various conditions and the balance that those conditions achieve. We believe that the 12-month temporary approval is in particular helpful for two reasons, and this is helpful for both parties. So the reasons are firstly that it allows the city to trial the amenity controls that are put in place through the various conditions, and secondly it also allows the college to ensure that these conditions are manageable and allow for the uses they intended to implement it. So in a nutshell, it gives protection to the city and it also gives protection to the operator in what we believe is equal measure. The 12-month approval period is also the right length of time, given a shorter temporary approval wouldn't necessarily allow the use to become properly established, which would mean it might become difficult to properly then measure the effectiveness of the controls put in place. My last point, I just want to provide some background on the unapproved use of the facility and just how that's occurred. As noted in the agenda report, the Wilson Christian Church has been using the school grounds for several years. Given the school has been in operation for many decades, the school was simply unaware of the need to obtain approval for this additional use. And then when the gym was constructed a few years ago, the church group moved into that building, given their growing congregation. And in order to construct the gym itself, the school was given a government grant to do so, which was provided on the basis that the building would be made available for public use, as is common with a lot of government grants given to schools. So accordingly, because of that fact, they mistakenly assumed that they wouldn't require any other approvals for the hiring out of the facility to occur. So as soon as the college was made aware of the need for development approval, they did seek to rectify this and have been actively working with the city to achieve that goal ever since. So I just want to make that known to council to reinforce that there was no real willful intent, as they were not aware of the need for development approval, and now they're obviously working with the city to achieve that. So councillors, I trust that this, along with the positive recommendation put to you by your council staff, enables you to see a path forward to a temporary approval of the development at next week's ordinary council meeting. If you do have any questions or wish for clarification or anything, we're more than happy to help you during your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your deputation tonight, Mr. Plugg. We'll bring the matter forward so you can hear the councillors asking questions. Thank you. If you'd like to have a seat. Item 5 on tonight's agenda is items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public. We do have a number of interested parties here for items that may be interested in some of the questions and responses to those questions from councillors, from our executive officers. So I propose to call forward CC 062 of 20, that being a new lease, Rossmoyne Junior Football Club. That'll be the next item up. Councillors, you'll find that on page 24 of tonight's agenda. The second item I'll call forward will be SD 025 of 20. The deputation from Mr. Plugg was relating to that, and that's the application for development approval for the addition of a place of worship. So I'll bring those forward. So reports of committee items, committee meetings at item 6, there are none. Reports from the Chief Executive Officer, there are none, and we will go straight into CC 062 of 20, which is on page 24, as I said, councillors, and is on the screen. Sorry, Governors, I didn't give you much time there. The recommendation is on page 24 and is on the screen right now. Thank you very much. Councillors, is there any questions in relation to the lease for the Rossmoyne Junior Football Club? Yes, of course. Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make sure that I'm getting this right, if I may ask one of you guys. I've got a couple of questions. You're asking the lease to be a change from exclusive use with good revenue capacity to exclusive with reasonable, which would bring your rent down from $12.68 to $8.58. That's it in a nutshell. Am I correct? Okay. Would you say yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That was all on that. Thank you. Is there? Can I would imagine this would come. Sorry. Under. Siri's gone off. I don't know how that happens. Is there any reason why this can't be done, Director Bowe? Is there a reason why? Is there some technical reason which I don't know about where this would not be able to be done?
It's actually Steve Leeson will be dealing with this tonight with, in Gary's absence. Executive Manager Steve Leeson.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst the city does have a policy that tries to maintain a level of consistency, I guess, across the leases that would be considered by council, at the end of the day, the decision does rest with council as to what the amount would be. So certainly it could be the reduced amount. In trying to get up to speed on this earlier this afternoon when talking with the staff, the things which they said to me was, and they were very grateful as to how open and easy it was to communicate with the club with regards to this, and that there wouldn't be much strong objection from themselves if that was how council wanted to decide.
There'd be no strong objection from, did you want to say that in your own words?
That there wouldn't be any strong objection to it if that's how council wanted to proceed.
Yes, Councillor Hon.
So that would mean just an amendment to the motion. Thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? Councillor Barry, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the key terms of the lease, it says 10 with a 10-year option, and BR01 doesn't. Well, it says a maximum of tenure of 10 years. There is an exception where they will be the organisation, given that if they've put a fair whack of money in it, can go for 20 years. Just clarification on that.
Mr. Leeson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that the lease documentation that would be prepared is for a 10 plus 10.
Just on the understanding, of course, too, tonight, with the director ill, Mr. Leeson's taken the chair at fairly late notice, so I would probably suggest if Mr. Leeson's not able to answer questions like that, just send them through to the director so you can get an answer before next week. Just your microphone.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can we take that on notice, because obviously it's recorded, and BR01 says a maximum tenure of 10 years. There are exceptions, and I think Councillor Spencer will know about that. Rossmoyne Kindergarten was one that got 20 years, so it wasn't a 10 plus 10, but then it did have there that 12-month clause, just in case there was some redevelopment.
Mr. Leeson, are we able to take that on notice just to find out whether we're able to, whether we're allowed to have an exception under the policy?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. We'll include that in the AB comments section of the report for the OCM.
Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Rossmoyne Amateur Football Club, they have an annual fee which is fixed. What exactly is that? And if your amount goes down, will you be passing on that saving to them also?
Mr. Leeson, do you know about the terms in relation to Rossmoyne Amateur Football Club? We might just take that on. Oh, sorry, are you able to provide an answer to the Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I can certainly answer that. Look, we've had varied arrangements with the Amateur Football Club in the past. As Graham had noted, that's been a cost basis where we have shared expenses and passed them on. So the last annual fee was actually $3,000. Now that did contain, as I said, a breakdown of costs. We're more than happy to share with the council, but it included, as Graham suggested, line marking, other building and maintenance requirements. We obviously get the rooms cleaned. This year, particularly in light of COVID, we had a cleaner come in and clean the facility every weekend. So on that basis, on the basis of us getting a reduced, we don't have a lease at the moment, but certainly on the basis of a reduced lease, that absolutely will come into play with the Amateur Football Club. And we have very open dialogue with that club to ensure that we both can support each other. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Ponaturai, and then I'll come across to Councillor Spencer Teo. Councillor Ponaturai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a simple question. I know the Rossmoyne Junior Football Club is very proud of their refurbished, lovely club, and do not like to rent it out for parties and things, but other than the parties, but for other events or meetings, do they like to hire it out? Because we have limited reserves and places, and we would like to see maximum use. So just would like to know that simple answer. Thank you.
Mr. Leeson, you might be able to provide an answer to that on notice, or are you able to provide an answer?
I'll try to provide an answer. My understanding is that the intention with the policy on tenancy management is that the spaces are made available for other groups to the full extent.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer Teo.
Just not 100% aware of the process, but if administration are in support or not in objection of the reclassification, could we amend the report now to save these gentlemen coming back next week and waiting with bated breath for a week and then deal with it then? Is that a possibility?
No, we would have to do it next week at the council meeting. I don't think we can do it before the council meeting. Yep, we'd have to wait until then. Any other questions, councillors, before we let these gentlemen go? Thank you very much. That'll be the end of the discussion on that item, so you're free to go at any time. Thanks very much for coming along this evening. We'll now move to item SD 025 of 20. That'll be the application for development approval. Could you explain? Thank you, councillors. The recommendation is almost on your screen. And we can't show it all on there. There's a lot of conditions on there. Councillors, any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Bain, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Three questions, if I may. Does the city intend to also maintain its own complaints register, as nearby residents may not feel comfortable contacting the school to make a complaint against it?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, certainly we would take any complaint and ensure that is registered in the city's record system. And certainly when we come to look at the permanent application, permanent approval, we can certainly utilise that system to pull out what complaints have been made, and we'll obviously actively manage those complaints as they come in.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Did city officers conduct their own investigations into any noise possibly or potentially emitting from the site on Sundays? Thank you.
Director.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, we did undertake some noise readings. Unfortunately, given the location on Manning Road, the background noise level was pretty much the same level as the background noise. The officers did hear muffled, music coming from the church. Certainly, one of those conditions would be that a noise limiter or a sound limiter be applied to the noise equipment, and also there's a condition that the noise management plan be updated to address the issue of amplified and live music. So that seems to be the biggest issue. But unfortunately, given the location of the site, Manning Road generates a fair bit of background noise. It was very hard to get a reading above that background level.
Councillor, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Will the city work to assist the church look for alternative locations should the officer's recommendation not be supported by council and during the term of approval? Thank you.
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, in terms of the city trying to find an alternative site, obviously it's outside the purpose of what we're looking at in terms of the development approval. Certainly something I can discuss with Director Adams, the CEO, Mr.
CEO.
Councillor, the church is self-determining. I mean, I'll leave it to them to undertake whatever inquiries they need to. If they make inquiries to the city, of course we'll try and help them. But ultimately it's in their control as to what decisions they take and where they want to go.
Any other questions, councillors, before I move on? Councillor Sarah Sabiri, go ahead.
Thank you. It's through you, Mayor, to Graham and Director Bride. When the church was built, I guess the school was built, and they provisioned a playground. Was there any sort of, was the playground part of the DA, or was that put there later? Because one of the complaints we've got is from noise from the playground, and unfortunately that won't be covered on the environmental protection noise regulations. So, and if you go out, you'd be able to see that the playground's really close to the bordering fence. So I'm not sure. I just wanted to make sure that that's been approved, actually.
Director Bride, do you know anything about the playground?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, the playground would have been part of the original school application, which obviously has been in place for a number of years. In terms of the ongoing use of that playground during the church service, I'll take that question on notice and get back to councillors on whether that is part of the application. I know that was an issue raised, so I'll get back to councillors on that one.
Thank you, councillor. Director Bride will get back to you. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Director Bride. I just noticed you said that the city did some noise monitoring. How did that stack up against herring storers?
Director.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, it was pretty similar. The herring storer did do an on-site analysis. Obviously, they didn't go all the way to the residents themselves, but they were obviously recorded right against the boundary line. And then from there it was collaborative. Modelling was done from that point forward to the dwelling. So the readings that we observed are very similar, if not identical, to what the consultant came up with. So we're pretty confident they are the correct measurements.
Councillor?
And just, I mean, because there is a huge list of officers' recommendations, conditions, who will monitor them? Who will monitor these conditions?
Who monitors the conditions, Director?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a requirement of the city's compliance department. So, and certainly they do audits of proactive audits of planning approvals. Certainly, if there's any complaints, that's also another avenue. And in this case, because it's a 12-month approval, when we report back to council at the end of the 12 months, an analysis will be done in terms of what the compliance regime has been in accordance with those conditions to give council some confidence when they consider the permanent approval that has been looked into.
Just your microphone, please, Councillor.
Just one other one. I mean, I think there's no more than, it says no more than 170 persons, but I mean, in two different sections it talks about 200. So, and then it says that possibly in future there could be 200. So, can we just clarify that, get that down to point? Because I mean, I'd hate to be the first day there's 30 more people if council considers or approves.
Can I just get some clarity on the reasoning for the different quantums in the report, Director? Do you know?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, the reason for that was the applicant applied for up to 200 people, given that would allow for growth over a 5 or 6 year period. Given the approval is a temporary approval for 12 months, and given the numbers currently they have, the 170 was based on the parking requirements, and will ensure over the 12-month period that there's no breach of that number. When the permanent application comes forward, at that point, if they can, they may wish at that point to consider some additional people, but at the moment, based on the parking requirements on site, we're conditioning it to 170. This is a 12-month approval. Then the council will consider a permanent approval at the end of this period.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Saberi, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, maybe two. One is, again, if the playground is going to be used outside the school hours, has the church considered any kind of provisions, I guess, or would they do anything to make sure that the noise, or if the kids are playing there, it's not going to become a problem for the neighbours?
Director, is the church obligated to mitigate that, or can you provide some comment on the question asked by Councillor Saberi?
Through Mr. Mayor, I might ask our senior planner, Maureen Hegarty, just to respond to that issue of the playground, if she can come to the podium.
Maureen, are you able to come forward and respond to that? Yeah, just come to the podium. The microphone is on for you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that the school has already advised the church that the playground shouldn't be used, and that it's in their intention to deal with that through the operational management plan. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Does that clarify that?
So so just to clarify, the playground is not supposed to be used by
That's correct.
the church. Okay.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who you are, and I can't ask you to come to the microphone. You're fine, thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just an extension of that. So, can the playground then be used on Saturdays for community purposes? Thank you.
I'll take that one on as councillors and ensure it's distributed tomorrow.
Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Holland, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that there was quite a lot of objections, and most of them were around noise and traffic issues. I noticed that there was a traffic study done. It's the city done its own traffic study to verify what was provided to us.
Director Bryan.
Through Mr. Mayor, given the amount of traffic, you're looking at 64 vehicles there and 64 exiting. Based on the West Australian Planning Commission guidelines on transport impact statements, it's well within the threshold, and the report received has been assessed by our engineering department, and they are comfortable with the report. So there's no need in our view to do a separate independent traffic study by an additional consultant. We're very comfortable given the traffic volumes that are being proposed in this application, and being that it has been operating as a church, we've tested those. We're comfortable that the road network can handle the capacity of the traffic.
Thanks, Director. I'll go to the Deputy Mayor.
This is, if I could just ask the pastor or someone that's come on behalf of the church, are they happy with the controls, most notably the number of people and the hours of operation, being Sunday morning? And what is the plan of the church after 12 months? Because this is obviously temporary. So they're the two questions for the church, if I may. Thank you.
I'm not able, just before you stand up, Mr. Plug, I'm not absolutely certain they're able to ask the church whether they're happy with the conditions. I'm not sure that that is actually... CEO, can I just ask, is that a question that... I just don't want to be pulling people from the floor answering questions without a need for it. I'm just not sure their happiness is actually... the conditions have been put in place by the city to mitigate the risk to the community, I guess, and to satisfy... I'll stop talking and let the CEO answer.
Thank you, Mayor. The practice is at agenda briefings that the questions are of the officers, not of the people that are in the gallery. I suppose it's better to ask if the officers have had conversations with the applicant, whether those conversations would indicate the extent to which the applicant is satisfied with the conditions. So that would be better directed to the officer, Deputy Mayor.
It's the second part of the question to them.
Yeah, I don't really want to be asking people to come forward. What was the second question, Deputy Mayor? Can you just remind me?
What is the plan after 12 months? This is a temporary arrangement.
I think that would depend on, I think probably the Director might be best to answer that, because that'll depend on compliance with the conditions, I'd expect. Director Bright, are you able to provide some light on that one?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor. So the applicant could either let that 12-month period lapse and they would have to then not utilise that building, or prior to the expiry of the 12-month approval period, they wouldn't have to lodge an application for permanent approval. So another development application is lodged, and that would then go through a similar process to the original application. So that would then run permanently with the land if that approval was issued by council.
And sorry, I cut you off, Councillor Holland. You had another question, did you?
The first bit of that question, could I get someone to answer that?
Sorry.
So I'll just say it again, the controls, so the 170 and the hours of operation, let's talk to the relevant director. Are the church happy with that? Is that, obviously I think there would have been some sort of conciliatory approach with this. Would my understanding be correct?
Director, have the conditions been done in consultation with the church? Any feedback for the question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the planning consultant said at this stage they're generally happy with the conditions. Obviously, at the end of the day, any of the conditions, if council does approve in accordance with the officer's recommendation, the applicant does have the ability to request a review through the State Administrative Tribunal. It's totally up to them at that time, but certainly at this stage we haven't heard of any major concerns with any of the conditions.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that on a lot of the objections that there was a lot of comments made by the city just noted on a few things. When will we get more of an explanation that I saw a few things that were noted? The other thing is, with the expansion, any possible expansion, a lot of people are worried about, I heard what you said, Director Bright, about the traffic studies, but we have noticed in the past that traffic studies have been not as good as what we would think, and that we've had to revise things, most notably the church in Varland Avenue in Willerton, where the traffic study said everything would be right and it wasn't. The noise part on this is a 12-month thing. What happens to monitor noise, the concerns for people, residents, noise levels after the 12 months? There was also something on here, which you've got here, which I didn't quite understand. This stupid thing. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, sorry. Where you've got, they need to provide the details, I think it's provide the contact details of all property owners, occupiers within 200 metres of the subject land, which has to be done with the operational management plan that is to be provided to the council within 60 days of that approval. Why are they providing that, and how will they get that?
Director, can you just
I
provide
don't quite understand that one.
Director?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the purpose of that one is to give the residents within that 200-metre radius the details of any outside contact numbers for the operation of that building. So there is a live complaint about a noise issue. That could be, there is a contact number that should be available for those residents to contact to address that issue live rather than waiting till the next business day. So it's simply giving a contact number, an after hours contact number, or when the events are undertaken, to allow residents the opportunity to contact that number direct.
And I think Councillor Holland's initial question was in relation to noise and traffic. Just will they be monitored throughout this first 12 months?
Yeah, so in terms of traffic, again, given these are low traffic numbers, and you'd find that the traffic generated would be less than a typical school day, for example. So look, we've got no issues at all with the traffic generated by this proposal. In terms of the noise, in terms of monitoring the noise, that certainly will be part of the assessment for the permanent approval. So it's, I guess there's an obligation, or given it's a temporary approval, for the church to really ensure, and other community uses, to ensure that their noise levels are compliant or down. And then that will be part of the assessment for the permanent approval. So that'll be a very important consideration for the permanent application.
Thank you. Councillor Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to, I think, Councillor Sabiri's question about Sunday. So did the senior planner say that on Sunday there would be nobody allowed on the oval at all? Is that correct?
I don't think that was said.
No, I'm asking.
Graham,
That's for the clarification.
Director Bride, the oval.
I just went to the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the use of the playground equipment, but what I'll do is I'll verify that to all councillors tomorrow.
And I think because it also says in 13B, Saturday 8 to 4 activities are to occupy in the multi-purpose hall, teachers' prep room, classrooms, library and oval. Is that confined to religion studies, or I think like Councillor Bain said, is there a crossover somewhere for community purposes? Because noise is noise no matter who makes it.
Director? Yeah, through Mr. Mayor. That's a lot better. Yes, so certainly one of the reasons, or one of the conditions, is in relation to the fact that you can't have any of these uses operating in tandem. So you can't, for example, have the community purpose use while there's the public worship use happening at the same time. So that condition 13B relates to the community purpose uses, and if you look there on a Saturday, the number of attendees for a community purpose event on a Saturday is quite a lot less than the 170 for the church use. But we'll clarify that in relation to the oval and the use of the playground equipment. So I've heard that tonight as a concern that a number of councillors raised, so we'll just get some clarity with the applicant on that and circulate it to councillors.
And one last one, just in relation to a question from Councillor Holland. With the noise issues, I believe you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would be attending those live, because you basically can't leave it till Monday, because we don't know whether it was just somebody ringing up pranking or whatever.
We'll be dealing with those live depending on availability of resources.
Yeah. We wouldn't, obviously, and we've done it throughout the time that it's been operating recently. We don't go there every weekend, but certainly we took the opportunity to just verify the data and the noise report that had been lodged with us. And if there were complaints, we would certainly do that again. So we'd have our health staff available to go out occasionally on weekends to test the veracity of any complaints.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, we'll now move on to CCO 61 of 20, which is the budget review as at the 31st of October 2020. Mr. Leeson is here this evening to answer your questions. Thank you for coming along this evening, gents. You're free to go. What I mean is don't feel obliged to stay. Not that we've detained you or anything, but don't feel obliged to stay. The council recommendation, is on page 4 and is also on the screen in front of you, councillors. Thank you. Do we have any questions in regards to the budget review? Yeah, Councillor Barry.
Thank you. 9B.
Your microphone, Councillor Barry. Try to remember.
I do.
I'm like a broken record up here. Every meeting. Microphone, please.
Okay. 9B, people and performance on page 7, it says the implementation of work, health and safety digital solution funded through a budget reallocations across the city's business unit. My question is, was that part of this 2021 budget, or is it something that is, for want of a better word, dropped out of the sky? Because I noticed that Parks and Gardens seems to lose a bit of money here, there and everywhere. So if I could have some clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The work health and safety digital solution was not part of the original budget. It's something which has come up since the adoption. It is quite a significant, well, it's of significance. It's quite an important solution to help us manage and be more proactive and do more effectively with safety across the city. And hence the importance of that has caused for a reallocation of funding to go towards implementing this. And if the budget review is adopted tonight, then we would proceed to implement such a system.
Sorry, next week.
Councillor, your microphone.
All right, G, land utilisation G, 9G, and I suppose it relates on to page 16 where it says land and building reserve for purchases, etc., and an additional $31,042 for outstanding rates. Now, I'm just wondering why the city is paying the rates for that purchase when we should be, or should we not be, chasing the person involved.
Mr. Leeson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that as part of the settlement process, and I can clarify this in the AB comments, is that as part of the settlement process, those rates are typically having to be settled beforehand or as part of the land transfer, and therefore that's why the additional amount got included within the purchase price. And that was what the sale of agreement was struck on.
Councillor?
Was it part of the purchase price, or it seems to be an add-on here, 31,000. So I know we paid whatever it was, $1.3 million.
Mr. Leeson?
I'll clarify that within the AB comment. My understanding was it was included as part of the negotiation of buying.
Put in the AB comment, Councillor.
Okay, last one. I don't ever believe that. JKL, Clean Canning, 338,000 decrease, increased sale of plant, income reduction in fleet replacement expenditure. Just a clarification on the sale of the plant, and what is the decrease? Is it just knocking out a truck or what?
Through Mr. Mayor, the fleet and plant market at the moment, the sale prices are doing actually quite well. So it's that we're actually receiving more money from the sale and disposal of equipment. So therefore it has, because we've got additional money come through, it's actually decreased the cost of operating that service.
Thanks, Mr. Leeson. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on now to CCO 63 of 20, submission received, renewal of leases, Optus and Telstra. at Ferndale Park, and the officer's recommendation is on page 34, and it's already on the screen. Well done. All right, thank you. Councillors, any questions in relation to those leases? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can the City confirm that there's nothing in the prospective leases agreement with Optus and Telstra that would inhibit it from negotiating with the providers to move any infrastructure to, well, from an existing site to a prospective club room / canteen premises? Thank you.
Director, or Mr Leeson, are you able to answer that tonight, or would you? Can we take that on notice? Thank you. Councillor Barry, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. And I haven't pulled it up, but Mr Walker's submission, in part, the city actually agrees that we didn't go through the proper processes. I'm just wondering whether that in some way nullifies what we passed last week and whether we would be required to go through that 3.58 process again. Thank you.
Are you able to comment on that this evening, Mr Leeson, or again, would you prefer to take that on notice?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll provide comment to the best that I can. In talking with the officers about the process of public notification that they went through, whilst it wasn't as broad, it wasn't as included in some of the libraries, etc., acknowledging that there were some shortcomings, we don't feel that it's actually negated the expectations. The new contracts are for existing towers, and there's not considered to be any significant departure from how it's being used or impact upon the community. So, in short, I would say no to that.
Well, the only reason I asked the question, Mr Mayor, through you, is that if one person has missed it, that's not to say that a number of other people have missed it as well for the very same reason.
Thank you. Just before we leave, Mr Leeson, that question from Councillor Bain, did you get his question, or would you like him to repeat it?
Mr Mayor, I wrote down as many notes as I could, but I was going to confer with the governance officers tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to take the opportunity to ask a question with these towers. Obviously, there's some talk now about 5G and in most concerned direct millimetre wave. Is that something that Telstra and Optus are planning to do on these towers? Or is there? Just wanted some information on that. Thank you.
Do we have that level of detail, Director?
No, Mr Mayor, I haven't got that to hand, so I'll take that on notice as well, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, councillors. We will, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to council meeting dates, which is CCO 64 of 20. It's also been spoken about just very quickly earlier. Any questions about the council meeting dates for 2021 before we move on? Shouldn't be. Thank you very much. We'll move to CCO 65 of 20. That's 37 Murray Road, Welshpool, extension of tenancy arrangements. The recommendation is on page 46 of your agendas and is on the screen. Councillors, do you have any questions? Thank you. Councillors, we'll move on to CCO 66 of 20, and that's the new lease for Victoria Park Lions Club. That's on page 56 of tonight's agenda and also is now on the screen. Any questions in relation to that lease? Councillor Barry?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I note that in principle, that the officers agree with leasing to the Vic Park Lions Club, but I would like to ask in relation to that, why does a not-for-profit have to pay that sort of money when earlier on in the evening and on a number of other occasions we've had sporting groups here who pay nowhere near that at all. So why doesn't this not-for-profit gain the same consideration as all those other not-for-profits?
Mr. Leeston, did you want to answer that, or do you want to take that on notice?
I'll provide an answer to as best as I can, but providing further information as part of the AB comment. In speaking with the officers who wrote the report earlier today, the fact that the property is to be recognised as at a commercial rate in line with the policy, but giving it a discount to reflect the fact that it is a community group was seen as an attempt to recognise that fact that they are using that site for a community benefit. I understand they are actually currently renting another premise in Welshpool and paying a similar amount of rent for such.
Thank you. You have a follow-up? No?
Well, I understand that, but nevertheless, in 14 it says it's charitable, and that's exactly what they are. And like I said, there's a number of other groups who, the Men's Shed, I mean, we pay $50,000 over 2 years for them to be where they are. And like I said, a number of other sporting groups. So I don't think that why we should be discriminating against this group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ponnatura?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following on Councillor Barry's question, how do we make sure there's a consistent in this lease agreement? And because, for example, earlier the Rossmore Junior Football Club, and they wanted to, they were very proud and pride about it, not to get the building damaged, and they didn't want to rent it out. That's fine. But I know Mr. Leeson's reply right now, because the Lions Club is commercially renting somewhere else, but that has nothing to do with us in making decision, right? So how do we make this consistently in making this decision for us? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Leeson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's through making recommendations in accordance with the Tenancy Management Policy BR01, which sets out a framework which tries to establish that consistency across all agreements for all of the tenants, so it is as equitable as possible. So therefore the recommendations that will come through the reports will be based upon trying to interpret and adhere to that policy as best as possible. I guess at the end of the day, the ultimate decision rests with council as to whether or not there's going to be any variance to what the officers are recommending.
Mr. Leeson, can I ask, obviously the Lions Club has been front and centre with the negotiations over this lease. I would expect that they're in agreement with what's been put before council. Is that right, or are we putting something up that they're not in agreement with?
That's the one question I didn't ask. I'll take that one on notice.
Okay. Okay, any other questions, councillors, before I move on? Councillor Holland?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I underheard what you said of Mr. Leeson about we've got to have some consistency and all that, but the Lions Club have been around for a long time. They do a very, very good job. They are a non-for-profit organisation. If there was a motion or an amendment put forward by a councillor, say me, for example, to amend the lease amount to a more reflective amount pursuant to what their activities are, what would the ramifications of that be as far as setting a precedent in the planning or the Tenancy Act at the moment be?
Mr. Leeson?
Through Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor Holland, you've recognised what the consequence would be. There would be, I guess, repercussions for all future leases that would come up and approaches from existing groups that already have leases requesting the same consideration or the same new equity be established. I haven't got a handle as to what the financial impost might be of that. But that's certainly what I would be expecting, is that because all clubs, I guess they do, talk to each other, network with each other. There's records of decisions that are made at council which are public. So I'd imagine that other groups would see that and assess their own situation and ask for the same consideration.
Mr. Leeson, just a question I wanted to ask, and you can take this on notice if you don't know. I mean, obviously our leases generally are for the benefit of City of Canning clubs and groups and charities and not-for-profits. The Victoria Park Lions Club, where do they actually work? Where are their boundaries? Are they actually in the town of Victoria Park, or are they in the city of Canning. Can you just answer that question?
Mr Mayor, I understand they currently have been leasing a premise in Welshpool and have been for some time now, where they actually go and refurbish computers, etc., and provide them on to children in need of that assistance. I haven't got details as to their members' makeup, as to exactly which areas they come from, but the fact that they are using a premise in Welshpool, which is within the City of Canning's boundaries, would give me a sense that they have got some City of Canning participation.
Deputy Mayor.
Same lines as you're thinking. Would they be happy to perhaps rename themselves Canning City Lions Club if they're coming here and want a benefit? Would that be something that's not realistic?
We can't. That's not a question that we can answer here, Deputy Mayor. They're not here. We can't answer whether they would like to change their name. We could certainly propose that to them. You could, but we can't answer that question for them this evening. Are there any other questions in relation to the lease? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
This is, just to clarify, this is a commercial property, isn't it? It's not a community, not zoned for community use or anything like that. Is that correct?
Mr. Leeson?
Yes, it is, Mr Mayor. My understanding is it's the old Weebeck site.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We'll move to CC 070 of 20. It's a late item. It's the monthly financial report of October 2020. The recommendations on page 2 of the circulated late item, and is on the screen now. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 10 or page 4 of the operating expenditure, general purpose funding, there's a negative variance of 119,000. Now I note, I think I read it on the iPad, there was some Bartholomew's, some premises that they had, about 8 of them, where there was $8,000 in the exemptions. My question is, it says here that there's $119,000. So is that extra to the exemptions that we have for the, well, when we had the budget?
Mr. Leeson.
And could we have a list of them, please? Because
Mr Mayor, let me clarify that within the AB comments. I'll come back to you for certainty.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Leeson. We'll put those in the AB comments and come back to you. Councillor Barry.
Are you going to take it on notice, are you? Sorry?
Yeah.
Okay, and the list, please. Over the page, implement a positive variance in infrastructure assets, implement POS strategy. That's got nothing to do with the one that's on later in this agenda.
Mr. Leeson. If you're not able to answer these, I'll take that on notice. Take on notice.
Okay, and then just going down to the warrant listings, I note that there's the Willetton Junior Cricket Club has got a grant for $2,500 and also another one for $949. Is there a reason why they get 2? Well, they actually got 3. There's a small grant. I can appreciate what that would be for, but...
Can we get an answer for Councillor Barry on that? Did you want to take that on notice? We'll take that on notice, Councillor. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We'll move on to just a note for the record, CC 067 of 20. That was the late item, review of procurement policies, AF 301, procurement of goods and services, etc., etc. That item has been withdrawn from this agenda and will be included in the December round of meetings. We have already dealt with SD 02520. That was the application for development approval for the place of worship. So we now will jump across to SD 026 of 20, application for development approval, advertisement in brackets, large format digital sign, close brackets at 1/2 Atlas Court, Lot 1 in Welshpool. The recommendation is on page 94 and is on the screen right now. Any questions, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I note that Main Roads WA is not supportive of the proposed LFDS. Can you provide further explanation as to why that might be, please? Thank you.
Director, is that just a standard... Sorry, Director Bright, I'm looking the wrong way. Director Bright?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. The Main Roads WA didn't support the application on the basis of a generic traffic safety perspective. It's in there, they've got areas, generic areas where they don't particularly like these types of signage along their roads. At the end of the day, the city received quite a detailed traffic safety assessment from the applicant's consultant, and we do have a small budget within our budget area to undertake, reviews. So we employed our own consultant just to check on that traffic safety. So we're satisfied getting an independent view, given the sign's already been there for 30 years, and it's going to be exactly the same dimensions as the original sign. It's just obviously it'll be a digital sign rather than a externally lit sign. So Main Roads, who basically will have their position will be tested by the West Australian Planning Commission. So there's an approval process by the city. The city can decide whether to approve or refuse this application. The applicant also needs the approval of the West Australian Planning Commission because Main Roads has objected. So WAPC will consider the Main Roads issue separately, but we've got to make our own independent decision. The applicant then has to go through the commission to get the final approval.
Thank you, councillors. Any other questions on that item before we move on? Thank you. We'll move to EN 026 of 20, Queen's Park Open Space Master Plan. The recommendation is on page 121. Any questions, councillors?
Sorry, SD 027 draft planning.
Oh, that's good. I was just seeing whether governance were awake, and clearly they're not. Thank you. We'll go back. There was an integrity test. SD 02720. Sorry, councillors, I've actually inadvertently skipped one while I was sucking on a mint. The officer's recommendation is on page 112 of this evening's agenda and is on the screen right now. That's the advertising of draft local planning policy LP 16, public open space contributions in residential areas. Any questions on that one? Councillor Barry.
Just to note my impartiality once again.
We can't hear it because your microphone's not on.
Just once again, I have my disclosure interest form, impartiality on that in relation to sections of the Local Government Act.
Yep, noted. Thank you.
Officer's recommendation. I'm just wondering, well, question one, have we ever had an SIB on this?
Director, have we ever had a...
Yeah, yes, we did have an SIB on this. Let me just check the... yes, we haven't referenced it in the report, but certainly we did have a SIB. It was only a couple of months ago, but I'll make sure that's updated in the officer's report.
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. I just have a call. Given the scope of this advertising policy, and in turn, if it gets passed, it will become similar to TPS 21, etc., etc. And given the fact that somewhere in the report it does say that the city is aware of those plots of land which will fulfil that, or three or more in the subdivision, does the city intend to post out to these people to get their opinion as opposed to just a small advert in the paper? Given the scope of this and the amount of money that's involved somewhere either now or down the track. Thank you.
Director, what will be the consultation on this, if any?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, the intention, given this does affect a large geographical area, and obviously takes into account Bentley, St James, Rossmoyne and Shelley, the intention was to, notwithstanding a city-wide notice, the intention would be to consult with the development industry, particularly the surveyors, because all the surveyors are the ones that will be putting these applications through on behalf of any person who wishes to subdivide. So certainly the intention would be to liaise direct with the surveying companies and the development industry more broadly to get some feedback as to whether what the implications are from their perspective.
Councillor?
That implication you're talking of, is that in relation to the people who own those properties? That could be three or more subdivisions, whether they do it themselves or whether they sell the property that's subdivided later.
Director Bride.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, yeah, certainly this would only impact those subdividers, whether it's an investor or a landowner wishes to subdivide themselves, if they're looking at creating between 3 or more than 3 lots, or 3 or more lots. I can certainly, what we'll do is we'll take the issue of the advertising offline. I'll discuss it with the officers and have a look at that. Whether we physically write to, it's quite a large swathe of the city of Canning, and there might only be a very small proportion that is looking to subdivide, but we'll certainly have a look at that between now and the AB OCM agenda.
Thank you, Director.
And just reading policy number DC 2.3, that doesn't have really any legislative clout, is that correct?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, policy 2.3 really references the requirement across the whole of Western Australia. If a subdivider creates 5 lots or more, there is a requirement straight away that they contribute 10% of their land area to public open space, or they make a contribution equivalent to that amount. So policy DC 2.3 applies to the whole state of Western Australia. So when there is a residential subdivision across Western Australia, 10% of that land area for 5 or more, but the policy does say this can be applied to subdivisions of 3 to 5 lots where there is a need identified within a public open space strategy. So we've done that work, which indicates that there are 4 suburbs within the city of Canning that are deficient in public open space. So that meets that test, and we've obviously spoken to the Department of Planning, who are supportive of the policy because it's based on a strategic position. It's not ad hoc.
And just in saying that, so if for argument's sake at the OCM council says no to it, then there's no problem with that. That's the legal point that I'm looking at.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, yes, certainly we're bringing this forward to council because we know there's a shortfall of public open space in those 4 suburbs, and we've just council has got a brand new town planning scheme which has considerable density increases. We've obviously recently adopted the public open strategy, so the timing is right now to put this to council to make a decision as to whether it wishes to go down this track in terms of getting contributions from developers in those suburbs. Certainly council could make a decision not to proceed with the policy, and it would then just accept that those areas of the city with deficiencies in public open space would remain unless it utilised, for example, municipal funds later into the future to acquire land or to improve facilities within those suburbs. So I guess it comes down to a fundamental question about who should contribute to the future provision of public open space if council wishes to make up for those deficiencies.
And through you, Mr Mayor, to Director Bride again, you may remember when you were here and I was here at a previous date, there was a St James Bentley public open space contribution that was funded by the municipal fund for a number of years. I mean, it went to 500 and so thousand that I remember. We never bought a block of land and it disappeared. What happened to that?
It's probably something I'm going to have to take on notice, do a bit of research and just do a bit of digging on that one. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll update the AB comment with it.
If you wouldn't mind, the only other thing that I would suggest is that as I'm reading this DC 2.3, it really smacks of, and it says that this is based on Stevenson-Hepburn plan from 1956, where they said you had to have 3.3 hectares. And it seems like the whole thing is being judged around that. And 56. Well,
Just need a question though. So opinions and argument. We need a question.
Well,
Would you like to make a,
the point that I'm making.
Can you phrase it into a question?
Okay. So are we basing what we've got in this policy still on the 10% of the Hepburn-Stevenson report from 1956?
Director?
Yep, 1955. I think that particular plan has held Perth in good stead. Basically, it's meant that from that period onwards, the city has developed with a reasonable amount of public open space, and that's the reason why you find the likes of Bentley and St James deficient, because a lot of that subdivision, a lot of that development occurred, before 1955, and maybe the suburbs that have come after that, the Canning Vales, the Willetons, that were developed in the 70s and 80s, were set up based on that 10% contribution. So that has been a common requirement since 1955, and it will continue into the future. It just ensures that for every, 10% of every bit of land that's developed for residential purposes is retained for public open space, and that is to be given up by the developer.
Thanks, Councillor.
Another question in 3.12 of that same policy, and you can I'll ask you whether this remains valid. On the basis of the uniform density of 30 persons per hectare and a standard contribution of 10% of the gross residential area for the public open space has applied since 1956, the requirement remains valid as the gross residential densities have remained much the same in that time, with smaller lot sizes being offset by declining household occupancies. Is that still valid or correct?
Director?
I think the ingredient that's missing there is that, for example, the Bentley St James area and parts of Shelley and Rossmoyne, given our Newtown planning scheme, we are looking at significant density increases in those areas. So whilst the occupancy numbers per household might have dropped from maybe the 70s and 80s, certainly there's a large uplift in residents. So not only is Bentley St James, for example, deficient now, with the extra density, the population that will come in future years, there's going to be more pressure on those public open space areas. So in this particular case, this is not an area that's going to stand still in terms of its density and development. There's a lot of development uptake that's likely to happen. That's why I said now is the opportune time to consider whether to implement this or not.
One last question.
Heard that before.
Yeah. The Brownlee Towers precinct, how will that be treated? Will that be treated exactly the same as those landowners who have the ability to have 3 or more subdivided properties within that parent lot?
Director.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, that's got its own structure plan area, so that's got its own public open space provision as part of that structure plan. So that open space provision will have to comply with that structure plan. So if they do that, they meet their requirements.
Money comes back to the city?
Well, they have to give that up in land.
Give it up in land, so they'll have to give up whatever the 3.6. Yep. I'm not quite sure of the total area of Brownlee Towers, but I'm sure you'll be able to.
Yeah, there's the area of that whole Brownlee or Bentley 360 is around about 26 hectares. So it's not quite 10% of the area, but approximately 10% of that area is going to be given up for public open space, and that's identified in the structure plan that's been adopted by the Commission and Council. And
the question then is, if you add that to what we've got, and I think somewhere in the property it says we still have in the Bentley St James area, within 400 metres walking distance, you can get to a park. How much will that Brownlee Towers area?
That's your 4th question since you said last question. How are we going? How are we getting close?
Yeah.
Yes. Important to me, Mr.
Yeah, the actual net POS provision, public open space provision, post the delivery of Bentley 360 is around about the same as what it was before Bentley 360, given there was a large reserve to the south, which has been acquired by the state. So in terms of the overall POS provision in that area, by the end of the development, you'll have different parts, different areas of public open space, but it'll be around the same contingent. So it won't have a major bearing on the shortage of open space in the suburb as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions on that before we move on? Councillor Holland.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. Is there the possibility that, like some of the blocks in Rossmoor and Shelley, they're quite big blocks, so you could have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units on it, and some of them have got the houses up the front. So if you did develop it to four blocks, as it were, and you kept the front one as your own, how do you calculate the price? The 10% of what? Because it's only 4/5. How does that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the 10% is based on the value of the whole property. So it's not the area of the balance lot, it's the whole lot. So if the lot was 1,000 square metres and you subdivide into more than 3 lots, you would then have to either provide 10% of land on your site, which obviously is not practical in some cases, or you provide a cash equivalent based on that, in globo value, the market value of the land.
How do you gauge the market value of the land where your old 1940s house is compared to the others? How do you gauge that when you're not on the market, so you've got no market appraisal whatsoever?
The valuation.
Yeah, it's done through, the Valuer General does those valuations. So there's a process in relation to contributions that we get. We've got the Valuer General would do that valuation for the city, and that would be the amount that they would have to pay.
When the valuation's done by the Valuer General, when is that done? After construction of the others, or when you're just subdividing? Because your subdivision value of your property is going to differ compared to what structure you're going to put on it.
Director.
It would be the value of the land prior to the subdivision occurring. So what's the current value of the land as it stands at 10% of that value?
The last question, which is just a bit anecdotal, I suppose. Councillor Barry was saying that there's 30 persons per hectare as based on the 1956. I didn't know we used hectares back in 1956.
The Greeks did.
I thought it was acres. But that was just an aside. I was just curious. The Greeks.
Thank you.
Did they?
Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to EN 026 of 20. Director Warren Bowe is the responsible officer for this report. It's the Queen's Park Open Space Master Plan. The recommendation is on page 121. Do you have any questions on that matter? Deputy Mayor, yeah, go ahead.
I've been looking through it and it looks quite exciting and visionary. Time frame wise, are we on track to make sure that our contribution is linking in with the State Football Centre and we're all going to have something that's going to be usable roughly around the same time?
Director Bowe, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, we're on track insofar as developing our master plan, Deputy Mayor Jacobs, but I guess how closely we are aligned to the delivery of the project by the state government, namely the State Football Centre, will depend on Council's resolution and the allocation of funds in next financial year's budget, or the success of our grant application to the CSRFF Forward Works program.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Councillor Barron.
Tom, just in relation to, it says adopts Queen's Park master plan outlined in attachment 1. I mean, I was struggling to find option attachment 1, but does that mean is it meant to mean option 1 on page 133?
Director Bowe.
No, Mr. Mayor, the attachment was at page 137 on the agenda, but I understand Councillor Bain had a bit of an issue locating attachment 1 as well. The hard copy of attachment 1 should be on your desk there, Councillor Barry.
Yeah, that's it. The
That's
A3.
it?
Yep, that's it.
I haven't had the opportunity to read that, but I will. Other than that, option 1 sounds good, and thanks for this, Director Bowe, and I've been waiting longer than anybody for this.
You were going to do a backflip at one stage, I remember you. Yeah. All right.
I think I've done a hammy.
Any other questions, councillors, on that? No? Thank you. We'll move to EN 027 of 20, the Sustainability and Environment Advisory Group unconfirmed minutes. No questions on that one. Thank you very much. The final item on tonight's agenda is EN 028 of 20, the proposed permanent partial road reserve closure, lot 565 in brackets 73 Hamilton Street in Cannington. The recommendation is on page 148. Are there any questions on that matter? Yeah, of course, Councillor Barry.
Not that I have anything against it, but just looking at it and knowing Hamilton Street, because it's got so much spare verge, what happens to the rest of it? Because there is some big blank blocks. Will those people who own those properties have to apply similarly to this chap, I'll call him? And then once again with whatever they have to pay for the services, and or then do they then have to pay for the land?
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject land is only the small section immediately outside lot 565,
Yep.
Councillor Barry.
Yep.
And some of the other, I guess, larger tracts of land that you reference will either be still part of the road reserve and will be able to be subject to the same process as applied for by the owner of lot 565, which will require the subdivision out of the road reserve and the purchase in freehold by the adjacent property owner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. There'll be no further questions, so I'll move on to item 8, which is notice of motion for consideration next ordinary council meeting. At item 8, there are none. At item 9, urgent business, there is none. At item 10, confidential matters, there are none on the agenda. And at item 11, I announce the closure now. There being no further business, I declare the agenda briefing closed now at 7:44 p.m. Thank you very much for your attendance and good night.